good day and very welcome to SNS. I hope that everybody has found a seat. Ahead of every election during the last, well, I don't know how long time, we hear warning about fake news, disinformation campaign, misinformation, and polarized media echo chambers. And with less than 1 year to our upcoming elections here in Sweden, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to this seminar at SNS, How Vulnerable Are Voters to Misinformation? And we do this seminar together with the Institute for International Economic Studies at Stockholm University, which we are very grateful for. So, before we get going, I would like to make, in order to start off the conversation, I would like to make a small poll here in the room, and you have gotten these two papers. So, cards. Please raise the green card if you are worried that disinformation campaigns might influence the Swedish election next year. And please raise the red card if you are not particularly worried. Please. Okay, there's a vast majority of worried people here in the room. A couple of less worried people, but they were like maybe 4 or 5. So we have, I think we will have an interesting discussion here today. And who knows, maybe you will be less worried or even more worried as in 1 hour when we finish. So today we will look at the research and what it actually says about voters' ability to tell facts from fiction, and also discuss the implications for journalism, of course, for policymakers, and also for us as citizens and voters. And to do that, we have invited Andrea Prat, who is professor of economics at Columbia University, and he will give an introduction both to the topic and present findings from his studies together with Charles Angelucci, in which they test whether people can distinguish true from false news. And after that, I will invite on stage our other speakers, Daniel Poohl and Jörgen Huitfeldt, who I will come back to. And also, of course, as always, I will invite you on several occasions to ask your questions and also to share your thoughts and insights during the seminar. So be prepared to join the conversation. But with those words, I would like to welcome Professor Andrea Prat up on stage. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Ilinka. It's a pleasure to be here, and I think this is a very important topic in Sweden and in many countries, so I'm very happy to have a chance to discuss it. What I would like to do today is mainly discuss some research findings, survey them, and so I will start with a recap of what the debate and the questions are very quickly, and then I will do a brief survey of what we know and what we don't know, and then I will discuss some new findings in our research, and finally I will maybe try to frame the discussion in terms of demand and supply for news, and that will be it for today. So I think the debate has sort of 2 or 3 main articulations, and you can do it in many ways, but a big theme here is the death of truth. So our inability to tell apart facts and fiction, and this has been a very important part of the debate. And we are less able to believe in the truth, and we're more likely to believe in alternative facts and conspiracy theories. And this is closely related to what I think is the other dimension of the debate, which is parallel universes. Here is a quote by Obama where depending on our ideology, we have not different opinions, that's fine, but we have different facts. And this is related to, it starts from ideological polarization, takes us to media polarization. Through digital media, it's easy to get to echo chambers, and so you only hear people from your side, and you have all these parallel facts that grow, and so you have left-wing news, right-wing news, and this is part of the problem. The problem is perceived to be incredibly important. So last year, Davos identified the largest risk for humans in the next 2 years, and misinformation was ranked first, above climate change even. There is a lot of policy and business proposals on how to fix this, algorithm, accountability, inoculation, lots of things. And there's at least in the US, a lot of discussion about changing the legal paradigm around free expression. There are, by the way, these are very serious constitutional scholars, Bollinger, Sunstein, and Kramer. And they think that maybe we should rethink the First Amendment, which is the right to free expression in the US. So I think it's very important to ask ourselves, what are the facts behind this debate? And is it true that we live in a post-truth world? And is it true that we have these parallel universes? So what I'm going to try and do now is look at the research, some of the research that we know. It's very difficult to do it in 18 minutes. By the way, can you tell me when I have 5 minutes left? Thank you. But let me try to do something very, very quick, and with apologies, maybe you're very familiar with some of it already. So the way one can think about this is to look at the information process. The information process starts with the production of news, digital news, paper news, so on and so forth. And this news gets distributed. The second part is now touches humans, and it's the consumptions of this news. Consuming means being exposed to them, but the question is, what do we do with that once we consume them? How do we process them, and how do they affect what actually matters ultimately, which is knowledge, right? Because it is with our knowledge that we make electoral decisions, that we contribute to political life. And this is where the death of truth at the end of this and the parallel universes will exist. So let me suggest that we look at these three phases separately. What do we know about the first phase? We know a lot. We know that a lot of fake stories are produced, and a lot of fake stories are circulated. We know that they tend to travel faster than real stories, and the numbers are really staggering, and often they're one-sided. So for instance, in the US, they are much more likely to favor Republicans than Democrats. By the way, I apologize. Most of what I do is quite US-centric, but there is a lot of research that looks at this in other countries, and this phenomenon is definitely present in other countries. Brazil is one example that comes to mind very strongly. Okay, so that's the first stage, and I think it's clear what's going on. What about consumption? Now, consumption, things are a little less clear. They're a little less clear-cut, because consumption seems to be very concentrated. So the people who actually read these stories read a lot of these stories, are quite a minority. The majority of us, we still get some of them, but it's a much smaller proportion. And it's unclear how many of them we remember and actually affect us. There's this study here that sort of show that there doesn't seem to be in the average American enormous effect of these fake stories. But remember, elections are chosen by small swing numbers, so it's still very, very important. And here is also fake stories are often just shared even when they're not believed. There are experiments that show that. So, but then ultimately the question is, how does all of that affect our knowledge? What do we know at the end of it? And what do we know, not just in terms of fake news, but also in terms of real news, because we want to be informed. It's not enough to be not informed about stuff that's not true. We also want to be informed about the real stuff. And so this is important to understand the depth of truth, parallel universes, and to understand limited solutions. And so far, there has been relatively limited data about this. And so that's why my co-authors and I have decided to work on this topic. And we've decided to try to measure directly. The result is available here. And we're trying to do three things here. One is we're trying to understand what is the general ability by people to distinguish true from false. This is what's your ability when you're confronted with something, what's your knowledge of real stories and fake stories. How does ideological polarization affect this ability? And as we expect to find heterogeneity in people. And so what is that drives this heterogeneity? Just 3 slides on the methodology, with apologies. So we're using about 15,000 subjects. These are we pre-verify their personal data. I can give you more details if needed. We have 11 monthly surveys, and we don't repeat them on the same subjects because we don't want to affect them. And we actually do it on 2 different samples as well to verify that it's not something of our sample. We want to make sure that this is representative of at least of the US. Now, news. Big question. What are the important news stories? And here, we're going to rely on mainstream journalism. So we're going to ask ourselves, how are people familiar with the stories that mainstream journalism considers important? So we have a panel of professional journalists from both sides, Democrats and Republicans. We start from Associated Press wires, and we ask these journalists to determine what are the 3 most important stories of the past months. And then we mix them. We mix them with fake stories. And we have, and this is the fun part, we have 2 ways to get fake stories. One is to look at the most circulated fake stories in the US in the past 3 months. There's a Snopes.org does that. And the other one is to actually try to invent stories ourselves that sound as plausible as possible. And so our journalists are very good at that. And they invent 3 stories that are completely false, but also very plausible. There's a funny anecdote. At some point, they invented a story, which was that Trump had proposed his daughter as a potential director for, what was it, the IMF, the World Bank. When they invented the story was fake, but a couple of weeks after, so we had to withdraw the story. Okay, so the test is this panel of people, and they're confronted with 6 stories, 3 real, 3 fake. They're mixed up, and they get about $1 for each correct story they find. They have only 60 seconds, so they cannot Google it. And it's important that you're paying them, because otherwise there's a cheerleading effect. You can just choose stuff that makes you feel good. And we do an identical test for sports and entertainment. So 3 fake stories and 3 real stories about sports and entertainment, just to get a calibration in a sense. Now I will spare you the statistical methodology behind this. Obviously, if you don't know, you're going to guess. And so that's something you have to use. And obviously, some stories are easier and some stories are harder. And so you have to calibrate each of these stories. So all the details are in the paper. What are the main results here? In terms of general ability, we find that our subjects are quite split in two. About 47% of them can confidently, when they're confronted with real stories and fake stories, pretty much can confidently pick the real stories. Only 3% confidently pick the fake stories. So confidently believe that the fake story that we propose is true. And the rest, the other half, they just don't know. They just have trouble picking up. So this is where they're guessing, right? By the way, you get similar percentages for sports and entertainment. So what are the factors that determine whether you pick a real story or a fake story? The first story is polarization. So if we live in this kind of separate universes, we will be more likely to believe as true stories that align with our preferences. And so we ask journalists to rank the real and the fake stories as favoring Republicans, favoring Democrats, or being neutral. And we do find that people who self-identify as Democrats are more likely to choose a Democrat story, whether real or fake, and vice versa for Republican. This effect is about 2% in the probability of discernment. And then we have the other dimensions of heterogeneity, and these are the classical dimensions we think of. Income, age, education, so on and so forth. And these effects are, so for instance, if you divide the population into the ones above median income and the one below median income, you get a 4% effect. The old and the young is a 6% effect. If you take these very, very basic socioeconomic effects, you get 18% here. So one of the, I think the biggest message from our research is that if you take these socioeconomic factors, they're much larger than the political factors. They're in order of magnitude larger than the political factors. So what can we conclude when we revisit our debate about the post-truth world? I think to both these questions, we give a partial yes and a partial no. Do we live in a post-truth world? Well, half of us don't. Half of us are pretty good at it, and half of us do. But those who live in the post-truth world, they don't particularly believe fake stories. They just don't know. It's just more than misinformation as such. This is lack of information. But I want to stress that the 3% to believe lies, this is very important because they can swing elections. So I'm not throwing this away. Do we operate in parallel universes? Yes, to some extent they do, because we do find that 2%. However, this is swamped by informational inequality due to socioeconomic factors, which is something we have not talked about a lot, in my view, in the past 10 years. It's a very important phenomenon. If we had had this conference in 1973, that's what we would have talked about. Somehow it got forgotten a little bit, but this is a key question that I think we have to ask ourselves. And when we ask this question, and I don't have an answer, I am going to put it right away, and I think this is an area where a lot more research is needed. I think there are two sets of factors, and I'm very much looking forward to what my panelists are thinking about it. One is the supply of real news, and one is the demand of news. The supply, we know that things have changed a lot, and this is, I guess, familiar. These plots are familiar to most of us, and I imagine that you get similar plots for Sweden. So the 20th century was an amazing time for news because of advertising. Advertising was great, and then it collapses. Advertising revenues just collapse, also circulation collapse. And so media has much less money, and this results in fewer news being produced, fewer journalists being paid. This is, I think, very bad because, especially at the local level, in the US, we talk about local news desert. And in terms of media capture, now because news producers, media are much less viable, it's easy for billionaires to buy them and use them as pawns in various games. And the other thing is that we get a segmented market, and this may be very US-centric, where a minority of readers continue to access very high-quality information by paying for digital subscriptions, and a majority don't. So those were supply factors, right? Because it was something that changed on the supply side. What happened on the demand side? Well, there is a generalized demand over time. So this is people who follow news, and as you can see, there's a big generational effect. Younger people are much less likely to follow news on whichever format you look at. And we do find that in terms of knowledge. Age is the biggest predictor of how informed you are. Why? Your guess is as good as mine, but there's definitely competition from digital entertainment, because now the medium can provide you with something more interesting. And so you can, maybe the way we're providing news is a bit obsolete, and we should think of other ways to attract young people. Maybe there's a lack of habit formation. When I grew up, there was a newspaper on the kitchen table. So it was natural to do that. And I'm thinking a lot about education, and I'm running experiments now about getting high school students, what can get them interested in this. So, conclusion, is misinformation important? Definitely a yeah. But I find it more useful on the basis of the data, not to think of it exclusively as death of truth and parallel universes, but to see broader dimensions, and to, in particular, see the socioeconomic context seems to be very important, and to think about it in terms of information inequality. Can we measure these factors? Can we fix them? This is something I hope to be able to say more about in some years. Thank you.
Thank you. So please stand over here. Very exciting study, I think, and also your results may be encouraging in some ways, but discouraging in other ways. What were you surprised of these results, or I mean, what were your, when you saw these findings, what did you think?
You know, when Trump was elected the first time, when Brexit happened, I really thought that fake news and ideological polarizations were a key issue in all that. So I was, over time, when the evidence started to come out, I realized that this was more complicated, and so this is what prompted part of this research. I mean, at the personal level, I'm Italian, and you will see that many of the people doing research in this area, at least in my generation, are Italian, and it's due to Berlusconi. So we grew up in a country where the media was completely controlled by one side, and where I think politics was highly influenced by that. And so I think it's something that I really wanted to understand.
But now you've only done this study now, so you can't look back and see if there's a change, if I understand you correctly. But do you think that if you had done the same study like 20 years ago or 30 years ago, do you think that your findings would have been different?
I honestly don't know. And it's a pity that we don't have studies like that in the past, for various reasons. One is that there are studies about how much people know, but the news stories were selected by researchers in some kind of random way. And obviously, if you select very obscure stories, and there are all these studies that show that people know nothing, but then you look at what stories they select, and they're quite obscure, frankly. I'm not sure that you need to know those stories in order to be a good citizen. And so unfortunately, it's very, very difficult to go back in the past. So the answer is I really don't know.
And what do you think? Maybe you don't want to speculate, or?
I mean, when you look at the generations, you do see the generational effect.
That's
so
true.
If we assume that, if we project that backward, we can.
Yeah. So and if we go back away from the U.S. context, it would be interesting to ask you how general do you think these findings are, and of course from a Swedish perspective, if you were to replicate this study in Sweden, and we will come back to that. But what do you think would come out, or what questions would you pose before replicating the study in Sweden?
So I think that information inequality is a very general phenomenon. I think in any country you go, you will find a difference. I would be very curious to know how large that difference is in various countries. Now, what we know from political economy is that the government caters and politicians cater to the informed, because if you're not informed, you cannot keep them accountable, and hence you get less. So when you have information inequality, you're gonna get political inequality. Catering is gonna be, and you see this, we have so much evidence for that. Now, this means you have political inequality, which translates into economic inequality. And so here you get this very bad, vicious cycle where economic inequality may affect demand for news, which may affect knowledge, which may create political inequality, which may then perpetuate the economic inequality.
Right, that's very interesting. I hope that we will get back on this together with our commentators. But before I invite you on stage, I would like to open the floor if you have any questions now to Professor Prat regarding the study and his findings. Yes, one question. Wait for a microphone and please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, and apologize for rolling in a little bit after you'd started. There have been some interesting studies done by the Center for Climate Change Communications at George Mason University that show a clear generational effect, educational effect, and also layered on gender. So for example, women were much more worried about climate change, and that worry increased with education. The flip side of that is that men in my demographic were dismissive of climate change, and the more educated they were, the more they were likely to deny it, clustered in particular regions of the country. That pattern was also repeated in Sweden in some research. It's probably 15, 20 years old now. But I wonder if you see those kind of demographic, gender sort of patterns beyond education in your work. Sorry for such a long question.
No, it's a great question, and I didn't know about this research. I'll check it out. I think two things. One, a small one is we do see a small knowledge gap between men and women, with men being more likely to answer correctly. I think the bigger point, which I don't have an answer to, is the transition between factual knowledge, and here we only talk about factual knowledge, right? And views. So your worry about climate is a view, and I think here there's a whole set of a whole line of work that's super important on narratives. I think what biased media does is not providing different facts, but it's selective reporting. So if you watch, say, MSNBC and Fox News, left, right, they very rarely report fake news, but they select very much what they report. And I have a PhD student now who's looking at images, for instance. And the images you get, they're all real, right? None of them is fake. And he's looking at images you get about immigration. They're completely biased, and then he tests them, and they generate very different emotions in viewers. What does that do? That ultimately, although none of them lies about immigration, ultimately that creates a very, very different narrative about immigration that people absorb. Now that is perfectly, I think this is perfectly fine in a sense. This is what media do. They weave narratives. Now, maybe we should be better. We should have education that helps us kind of see those narratives better and see through them.
Thank you. And I think this is a good segue to inviting our two panelists on stage. So please, Daniel Poohl and Jörgen Huitfeldt. And Daniel Poohl is the CEO and publisher of Expo, which is a non-profit foundation and magazine founded in the 1990s that monitor in order to counter racism, right-wing extremism, and also conspiracy-driven disinformation. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Jörgen Huitfeldt is the editor-in-chief of Kvartal, which is an independent online magazine and podcast platform, founded a bit later in 2016. And you have the aim to deepen the public debate by providing nuance and also a variety of voices getting heard and listened to and expressed. So welcome, warm welcome to you too. And before, I'm very curious, of course, to hear what you have to say on Andrea Prat's research and findings, but it would be nice to sort of start off the conversation by hearing from you how would you describe what is the problem with disinformation, misinformation, use of fake news interpretation? So how would you frame this problem? Would you like to start?
Yes, of course. So, hi everyone. There's so many people here. I was sitting at the front row, so I didn't see you. So Expo Foundation and Expo Magazine, our task is to inform about racism and xenophobia through journalism. So that's basically our mission. That means that every day we are monitoring especially far-right groups, but also other forms of extremist milieus that are trying to convince us, the audience, the public, about their ideas and their views. And it's clear that one of the tricks that they have is sometimes to lie. But I really do like the last comment here, because what we have been teaching during our education, in our education department the last year, is that I don't think we should look for the fake news in itself. So what we are dealing with is extremist groups that with a very narrow, repeated kind of narrative convinces their audience that the world is on the brink of collapse, that the migrants are floating in, that we need to save our country now. Sometimes that are mixed with real kind of fake news. Many times misinformation, things that they actually haven't checked up themselves that appear to be true from their point of view, but in the end is fake, are spread by them. but not in a vicious way, just because it kind of fits with a worldview. And my biggest fear is, of course, that this kind of machine of disinformation and misinformation gets a bigger spread in society. It seems like there are, at least from the American perspective, a few percent that tend to believe the most outrageous stuff. But there are 50% out there that doesn't really know, and that worries me. Because I think in the end, partly like the Obama quote in the beginning, I mean, in a democracy, there's no problems that we have different views. And I can't really see that there is a problem that different media has different narratives when it comes to describe reality either. But when we reach a situation where we no longer agree on the facts, the kind of basic pillar of democracy erodes. And that's my biggest fear here.
Thank you. Jörgen, how would you describe the problem?
Just as Daniel and also Professor Pratt, he mentioned it, I think also that the biggest problem is the crisis in confidence of, well, in lack of better expressions, mainstream media. Because you need to have verified sources that most people are likely to trust. And the problem has sneaked up and become more and more a bigger and bigger problem. I mean, now we're in a situation where people in power, even the most powerful people of all, actually, refer to these sources as fake news. So where will you find the truth if you can't trust even the most verified sources and most credible sources like New York Times, for instance? And we have to ask ourselves, how did we end up here? I think whether a story is true or false is not the main thing here. It's what you tend to focus on. Daniel says correctly that racist newspapers and newspapers that have this topic on mind, they tend to focus or highlight certain aspects of the migration complex, and they tend to leave others out. The problem is that the verified sources, like the New York Times and Swedish television, they do the exact same thing, and they have been doing it more and more. And I think they have done it for a good purpose. They want to fight racism, they want to fight chauvinism, nationalism. But the problem is that when you see that these trusted sources don't trust their own model, they get these problems of confidence. Just a few examples. For instance, the Biden administration's pressure on social media, if you remember, when they actually contacted Facebook and Twitter and tried to make them change maybe not change the algorithm, but leave stuff out that was maybe true, but not constructive, according to the Biden administration. That didn't get much focus. If you compare it with the Russia investigation against Donald Trump, for instance, that, as far as I know, it wasn't a lot of truth in that. If you sort of count how many New York Times articles will you find about Trump and the Russia investigation, and compare that to how many articles or news pieces you will find about Biden's method of trying to change the social media flow, I think you will find that it's a factor 10 to 1 at least. And you have also if you compare it to Donald Trump and Russia, you have Hunter Biden and his business in Ukraine. It was actually, I think, categorized as fake news even, which it wasn't. And when the verified sources that you're supposed to trust, when they act that way, they will have a confidence crisis. And that's what we see now. I was totally surprised when I saw CNN, which in Sweden is a source that we've been watching here as well, and thinking that this is sort of the mainstream story or news from United States. On prime time, they have less viewers than the Swedish television in a country with 330 million inhabitants. We have only 10 million. And you see Megyn Kelly and Joe Rogan, they have like 40, 50 million views sometimes. It's an earthquake. So I think that's the main problem, that the sources that used to be verified, even though you didn't maybe always agree with how they selected the news, you sort of trusted them. I think most people did, even those who didn't agree with them. But now we're in a situation where many people don't trust them anymore. And where will you find truth then? The result, or the obvious where we're at, will be that, well, there's one truth there and another truth there, and maybe the real truth is somewhere in between or somewhere else. That's a really big problem, I think.
Okay.
And the biggest problem.
Thank you, and we will soon get into the study and what you think of that. But I would like to let you come into the conversation, just give some first remarks on what Daniel and Jörgen have said. Andrea Prat.
I mean, the confidence crisis is definitely real. You see all these surveys on how much you trust the media, and it goes down a lot. It goes down for every institution. So it's not trust in the media, but it's trust in the system, in the elite. So I think that's something that has to be put in that perspective, and clearly populism is related to that. And I don't know exactly what to say. It's I think it's very interesting that Joe Rogan gets 14 million listeners, but I'm not sure that it's because of a political slant, because if you want trustworthy right-wing news in the US, you can read the Wall Street Journal. So I think it has to do with some other dimension about what people want and how it's communicated. So the Wall Street Journal is definitely on the right side. It's very reliable, very trustworthy. Then they have very conservative views. So how do we explain that? Is there something else going on in the way news are presented, in what people are looking for? This is a question that I don't have an answer to. Now, one other point that I thought was very important, you mentioned pressure. And this is a whole chapter that I think is very important, and it's the idea of media capture. So we are, at least in the US, we're relatively used to thinking that the government does not control the media. And I think Sweden is another country where this is true. I grew up in a country where this was not true. And this is something that I'm very worried about. So I'm extremely worried about the fact that old media capture is coming back. And that in a country like the US, you can see attempts to control mainstream media. I think this is for me, is one of the top issues in this area, and often this is excused by saying, "Hey, the media is being biased, and hence we have to undo that bias." And it's true that the example you give by Biden fits that mold. So I think part of what we should be doing at this point is, I think, restating the importance of free and independent media above anything else. Whatever we think about bias and selection and quality, the solution is not government control. At least that's my view.
Because you didn't really get into the policy implications of in your presentation, so maybe you could elaborate a bit on what you suggest or what you sort of in your paper and in your, or maybe not in your paper, but I mean, from your findings, both on the supply side and on the demand side, what do you think should be done given your findings?
I think many solutions should be explored, and definitely, you know, what Daniel is doing about trying to get the truth out and educating is super important. We are trying to explore something that again goes back to the 70s and even earlier, and it's the idea of media literacy in school. So what we know is that once you look at 20-year-olds, they're really split. Some people, the majority, are not interested in the news. They're not interested in getting informed. Some are. Where do they get that? And mostly it's the family right now. What role can the school play in that? And this goes back to stuff of the beginning of the 20th century, John Dewey, the idea that you're not born a citizen, you become a citizen. And so I'm thinking a lot about the role of schools. And so what we're doing, this is with my co-author, Julia Caget in Paris. We're experimenting in French schools. And we're doing a double experiment where certain schools are just control. Other schools will get free access to Le Monde, which normally is behind a firewall. So this is to measure the kind of the supply effect. And others get a media literacy module, which is provided by their teachers to get them interested in the news and to try to create that habit early on. And our plan is to follow them over the years to see if that makes them more informed in the future, more likely to vote, so on and so forth. So we have very, very super preliminary results that they just came out last weekend. And again, they're very short term, but they look promising. They become more informed. And what you need is the double treatment. You need both to give them access to quality news and to give them the media literacy intervention.
Mm-hmm. So Jörgen and Daniel, what do you take away from Andrea's study, both the sort of empirical findings and also this demand side, supply side? On the supply side, the need for independent media, as I heard you, one thing, and maybe rethink the media business, which is already happening, and on the demand side, media literacy, and also, of course, looking more deeply towards these socioeconomical differences, and also that ideological, the ideological differences only explain 2%. So, would you like to start, Daniel?
Well, there's so much to comment on. First of all, I would like to kind of thank you for this research. It was very welcomed. So misinformation, fake news, all of these, it's buzzwords. So people tend to throw them around and without so much knowledge and so much hard facts. Now we have some hard facts, which shows that this is maybe not what we thought it was partly, which is really interesting. I would like to maybe kind of focus, because you asked like 10 questions in one, so maybe we will never get away from the fact that media, proper media that doesn't lie, will always have narratives. You know, they will always frame reality in some extent. Journalism is about picking something, you know. An editor always picks a way of writing your story. So I really strongly believe that we have to reinvent media literacy amongst young people. And I think we have to invent media literacy for everyone. I think we have to understand, we have to be better to not throw fake news as towards everything that we don't like. Because I think what we have to understand is that most of the things we read are true. And the reason why we react is because maybe we don't feel comfortable in the way it is presented. And it would be good for us to be able to kind of orientate along that line, so to speak. Amongst young people, there is a lot of work being done in Swedish schools. And the first kind of generation was all about, looking at the sources, which ended up in a situation where young pupils called us every day and asked us, so you are writing that this person is sentenced to jail. How do you know that? Well, because he was. Apparently, the last years, it has changed to be more about, can we trust this source in itself? But I don't think that is enough, because can we trust this source? You can always trust a source if it's a fact. If it's only about can we trust this source, we might end up in a situation like you describing, Jörgen, where kind of the most established source are those that are trustful, which is not always the case. I think the trick here is to be better to understand how things are framed, understand political narratives, be better to understand what might be a point and what is not a point from my perspective. And I also think that's maybe the final thing here, and because I was thinking about why is it that people like Joe Rogan more than CNN? Well, because it's fun. Because views are more fun than news. And I think it also has to do with entertainment here. People like to look at people that are arguing, that have different views. And I don't know if there is any research done where you kind of measure how much of the production is about views and how much of the production actually is about news that are new in itself, not only reporting what someone else already reported or reporting what a politician said, but bringing something new to the table. I believe that that is the journalism that needs to be supported, not the journalism that is about views, because, let people talk. We don't have to pay for that. But I would like a bigger support system for independent journalism that brings out the new stuff to the table. And then it's kind of in the end up for the rest of us to understand that and talk about it and present that in different narratives, because that is what a democracy is about. But I miss the new stuff on the table. And I think that is what might bring some trust back to media, if there is not only people there discussing views, but actually giving me new information that kind of makes my head explode.
Thank you, and I will like to get Jörgen on into the conversation as well. And it would be extra interesting for you as an independent news provider to hear your views on this sort of supply side argument from Andrea, but of course.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to complicate what Daniel said. I think it's not necessarily that people like views more than news. I think it's hard to separate those two nowadays. I think transparency is a key word. I don't know if you remember when Donald Trump was at Joe Rogan's show. I've never seen him like that, and I think that goes for a lot of people. I had seen short clips with a stupid, ignorant man, which he is. That's my personal view, but he was much more than that, and you can see that in the Joe Rogan show. I don't know if it was 3 hours or something, and that's a transparency. Another point is that I think there are two, this is more of a philosophical remark, but there are two ways of finding truth that stand against each other now. One of them is the Elon Musk way, which is self-correction. You put something out on Twitter or X, which is false. A lot of people, they have this system where you can put a remark and say this is fake news, and then there's a discussion, and maybe at the end of the day, you find some sort of truth. when the discussion is finished. The other way is reliable sources doing the research for months and months, and then they deliver a truth in a package to the audience. Personally, I like the latter. I think it worked fine for me until now, but I think the first will win. It's inevitable because we can't stop. It's an unstoppable development that we can't do much about. And you talk about support systems and things like that, but when you say that it shouldn't be government controlled, well, it tends to be. If the support system should give money to some and not to others, there you are, controlling from above. So I think we should focus a lot more on the demand side. Mm-hmm. What do people want and why do they want it?
Yeah. And I mean, about this free, independent media, the Swedish tradition is with the strong public service companies, both on radio and on TV. And so what are your, and you are now a sort of pioneer or an intruder in this landscape. You're not alone, of course, but there are several new outlets. So I mean, the Swedish media landscape has changed a lot. What do you think will be crucial in order for it to grow in a constructive and good way?
Well, I'm not sure it will be constructive and good, but it will be what it is, and I think it will be hard to control it. And I'm pretty sure that public service media in Sweden have the best days behind them. They will not be able to dominate the narrative in the way they have been for as long as I've been alive.
And what should their role be?
Well, I think they will have to focus on the things that are not done out of demand. That is, things that people are willing to pay for. It's already like that now. We have drawn the conclusion that news, you can't charge people for news because it's free. It's everywhere. So what you can charge people for is in-depth stories, portraits, things that they are interested in and they won't get anywhere else.
Maybe a Joe Rogan kind of
well, it doesn't have
series.
To be Joe Rogan. It can be something totally different that people like and that people are attracted to. But my main point is that even though I and many with me would like maybe to turn the clock back to 1980, where it felt a little bit more, I don't know, secure, we won't be able to do that.
We have time for a couple of questions, so if you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand and wait for a microphone. Yes, there's a microphone coming. It's on.
I'm curious to know what you think of artificial intelligence when it comes to the fight between fake news and real news. I presume that it could be used to produce fake news that are more difficult to distinguish from the truth, but perhaps also be used for making it easier for people to find out that it is fake news. Can you give us your view on that?
I think the jury is very much out, and you point out two forces. With AI, you can produce incredible fakes, and at the same time, AI can fight to find them. There's one more thing that I worry a lot about. It's micro-targeting. So suppose you want to win an election by manipulating the media. In the past, you had to do these blanket things and try to manipulate everything. Now what you can do, especially if you control social media, is to target exactly the people who are swing voters and are not very informed according to my research. You can do better than that because if you know enough about their habits, you can probably know exactly what buttons to push. And then you don't need fake news. You just target them with selective stories that would push exactly this button. This voter is gonna swing here if immigration may be there, and so you target them exactly. We know that to win an election, you don't need a lot, and so I'm very worried about that, and that takes me back to capture. I think we need to have very strict rules in place for social media on how these algorithms get implemented, in particular the micro-targeting.
Thank you. So I would like to finish on the upcoming election and ask Jörgen and Daniel if they raise the green card or the red card, and regardless, what do you think is sort of the most important thing to do in order for us to get an election that is as sort of honest and good as possible? Jörgen, would you like to start?
I don't know if you saw the debate yesterday on Swedish television. I've been thinking why this format seems so outdated to me. I don't like watching it anymore. I do it because I have to. Before I thought maybe it's the media's fault. It's too much the media directing the whole thing and the politicians just obey and do what they're told. But now I tend to think it's the politicians that are the problem. They don't act in a very dignified way, and I think that's where we have to start. They are responsible for the quality of the public debate more than the media is. And we have the kind of politicians we deserve, because that's the politicians we have voted for and we have assigned to rule over us. So I think that's where it has to start.
Thank you. Daniel?
I totally agree. I think it starts with the politicians, and not only in the TV debate, only in the public debate. How fast are you running into a situation where you actually maybe don't know all the facts before you kind of push your emotion button and scream? So I think it starts there. But of course, it also has to do with if journalism is, if journalists can cover the topics that people care about. We saw in the last election that the question that most of the voters were interested in and was the most important topic was healthcare. I wouldn't say that the election debate had healthcare as its main topic, even though it seemed like when you look at surveys that was the most crucial kind of worry for a lot of people. So I think that is something to think about as well, at least from public service and big news companies.
Thank you. And this hour has passed very quickly, but I invite you to stay over a coffee and continue the conversation. And I would like to thank Andrea, Jörgen, and Daniel for sharing both your research and your views and experiences with up here on stage. And before I leave you to the coffee and the rest of your day, I would like to switch to Swedish. Och bara uppmärksamma er på att vi delade ut SNS-priset i våras som går till en yngre forskare som både bedriver spännande forskning och är duktig på det, men också tar det här uppgiften att nå fram och nå ut med sin forskning för att förändra samhället till det bättre, förhoppningsvis på allvar. Och vi hade 5 finalister och nu sätter vi igång föreläsningsserie som börjar med vinnaren Sara Landström som jobbar inom rättspsykologi. Och sen så kommer de andra som på ett litet pärlband. Så varmt välkomna till det här är superspännande forskning och de är också superspännande personer som verkligen gör ett väldigt viktigt arbete. Så ni är jättevälkomna till dessa seminarier. Och sen vill jag också slå ett slag för vår Young Professionals-program, SNS Vision, som riktar sig till yngre personer då som både har ett stort samhällsengagemang och vill utveckla det vidare och bredda sina nätverk och också förstå lite hur man kan kanalisera sitt samhällsengagemang i liksom yrkeslivet. Så att om ni själva är en sån person eller känner någon sån så får ni jättegärna tipsa om det eller själva anmäla er. Och jag vill också säga det att nu inför valet så kommer vi göra vi håller på precis och förbereder en rad seminarier på demokrati och valområdet, så att håll utkik efter det. Innan ni går får ni jättegärna svara på en fråga då om vad ni tyckte om det här seminariet genom att mata in den här QR-koden. Tack så mycket för idag!